when the time comes and kind of operate accordingly. So let's not anticipate things before they actually take place, and hope for the best, inshallah. There's also like I'm expecting that there's going to be some type of an investigation to all of this now that it has become so public. I'm sure a lot of companies are going to want to do something about it. Perhaps the brother is going to. It is not that bad either. Just a bit of a bleeding. The footsteps are getting out of hand, though. Yeah. They came yesterday. You go grab the somebody with the microphone. What? The white. The spray ball on the right. Where is it? West. So summer short of ours. There's a rag on the carpet. Assalamualaikum. Looks like we're going to have a private session. We're going to have a private session today. Oh, there's a couple of people. What's that?
I thought we were going to be late.
Oh, no, alhamdulillah. You made it on time. You're good. Oh. Waalaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we're going to start in 1 minute, you guys. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his companions, and to the righteous men and women that walk in their footsteps, and I ask Allah to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. My dear brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khair for joining us today. This is the Tafseerah program, and we continue to our discovery and our investigation of the house of Imran, Waqim, the grandfather of Isa alayhi salam, the grandfather of Jesus, the father of Maryam radiallahu anha. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in the Quran that there are two of the great prophets that were selected by God, Nuh and Ibrahim, and two houses that were selected by God, the house of Ibrahim and the house of Imran. This is what we have been investigating the last few sessions. Today is session number 5 in Surat Al-Imran. This surah is about steadfastness. It's a surah about thabat. And as I said before, it was revealed in that critical period, covering the events basically from the victory of Badr all the way through the defeat of Uhud. So this is basically year 2 after the migration of Muslims from Mecca to Medina. The Hijri calendar was designated in accordance actually with that event. And so the Islamic lunar calendar is based on the migration. So, the Gregorian calendar is based on the birth of Jesus, which basically makes this year, 2025, right? But the Islamic calendar, I think it's 1447, is based on the migration of the Muslims from Mecca to Medina. We are actually in the month of Muharram, which is the first month of the Islamic lunar calendar. And so the Surat Al-Imran was revealed in that critical time, chronicling the details of the defeat of Uhud, and so speaking to the notion of steadfastness in the face of defeat, steadfastness in the face of a formidable enemy, but also speaks to the other forms of steadfastness when you don't have to meet an army in the battlefield. Rather, it's steadfastness against temptation, against seductions, against the allure of the material world, temptations of steadfastness against the alternative ideologies, Christianity and Judaism being a good example of that. And so there is a nascent Muslim community that is forming in Medina. And now they are met with the local monotheists, the Jews and the Christians. And so the question becomes, what's so unique about your message that we need to give up our own faith and follow you, right? So with the idol worshippers, with the pagans, it's a much easier case to make, okay? You give up your, God that is made of stone that you've created with your own hands and worship the God of the universe. But the Jews and Christians would say, well, we already worship the God of the universe. What's the point? Why should we give that up and come to you? So it becomes like, a challenge to this faith. And I said a couple weeks ago that the truth claim of Islam is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surat Al-Imran, Inna ad-deena inda Allahi al-Islam. Indeed, the only deen in the universe, the only deen that is accepted by God, the only religion, the only faith is Islam. And this doesn't mean that Islam is correct and Christianity is wrong. What this means is that there's only one religion, and everything else is just an offshoot of that same stream of monotheism that has come to us since the time of Adam alayhi salam, which also means that the true followers of Isa alayhi salam, of Jesus, at his time were considered to be Muslim in the Quranic designation. And those who followed, the Prophet Musa, at his time are not Jews, they are also Muslim. But the ones that refused to follow Isa alayhi salam when he came, and we will talk about this a little bit today, became designated as Jews. And the Christians that refused to follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were Muslim, initially, and when they refused or chose a different path, this is how Christianity evolved into its own religion. Otherwise, it is only the truth claim, the essential aqidah of the Muslims, the creed of the Muslims is that there's only one religion. It's been the same from the time of Adam alayhi salam until today, which is to submit and to surrender yourself to the will of God in every aspect and every ounce of your being. You speak in a manner that pleases God. You operate in a manner that pleases God. You make choices in a manner that pleases God. You put the preferences of the Creator before your own, and you invest in that relationship. This essentially is the meaning of Islam with a capital M. Now, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he brought the last chapter of this bigger Islam, and that chapter basically was the Quran. So Surah Al-Imran is a surah about thabat. It's a surah about steadfastness. How do I remain strong in the face of all these alternative ideologies? How do I remain strong in my faith in the face of materialism or all the other isms of the world? How do I remain steadfast in the face of direct challenges to my faith, direct challenges to my safety? When my faith becomes the hot potato. I was speaking to a group of brothers the other night, and I said that if the people of Gaza were not Muslim, this would have been resolved a long time ago, because they would have had to make the needed concessions, and they would have had to make the needed adjustments, and it would have been okay. we're going to give you this and we're going to give you that, and it'll be fine. They would have been co-opted. The reason they continue to suffer is because they are Muslim, and being Muslim means that there are values that you cannot compromise. There are essentials that you cannot give up. Hence the notion of thabat. So steadfastness means there are things that we cannot, there are unchangeable things that we cannot simply give up, because the world evolves around us, right? While there are other things that we can allow to change, but there are values, essentials, that we cannot allow to change. And as I said, Surat Al-Imran, and we've started talking about this last time, it challenges the Christian narrative without calling out Christianity necessarily, right? It may even question the character of some Christians, or it may talk, in a somewhat ostracizing fashion about certain practices within, Christian leadership of the time, or, the church or whatever, but never levels a direct attack against Christianity or Judaism. You don't see that in the Quran. There's mention of Jews and Christians, but it does not attack the faith itself. Why? Because we think that Islam is a continuation of that same thing. We will be attacking ourselves, right? And so it challenges the Christian narrative. It challenges, Trinitarianism. It challenges the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But it does that gracefully. It does that by providing the alternative worldview. And I was, this morning I was actually just taking a quick look at, modern Christian sects. So obviously you have the Trinitarian Christianity, you have the Catholics and the Protestants and so forth, and all of their different offshoots. So, the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians and the Lutherans and all the other branches of Protestant Christianity, these are all Trinitarians, right? But then you also have the other groups that are less Trinitarian. So, the Jehovah's Witness group, for example, who believe that, yes, Jesus is the Son of God, but does not even come near who God is. Jesus is a finite creation of God, began and ended. Whereas the Father is the Father. There's nothing like him, right? You see also echoes of that in Mormon Christianity. And then it goes to the other extreme. I wouldn't call it the extreme. I would just call it, more of a Unitarian manifestation of Christianity that you see in the Unitarian Universalist church today, which also has a lot of following. And so it is not true that all Christians accept the Trinity. That is not true. Not today, and not in ancient times either. Right? There was also a variety of different ideologies right before Constantine. And, so that's 350 years after Jesus, where Christians kind of took their time, evolving, and took their time disagreeing, and took their time fighting over the essence of Jesus and the nature of Jesus and so forth. And, certain groups attacked the other groups. And so there were those who believed in, Jesus as man, as flesh and blood. And then there are, like a great, religious leader, a great religious teacher, not divine in any way. There's also those who believed that Jesus was just an angel that walked this earth temporarily. Others believed that Jesus was truly the Son of God, metaphorically, and others believed that he was the actual Son of God, literally. And others said that he was just God incarnate. He walked the earth himself, as God, and so on and so forth. And then there's all these different views. Arian Christianity also believed that their faith is kind of similar to what is today the Jehovah's Witness creed, which is that Jesus was still a creation of God. He may have been the Son of God, but he's still a finite creation of God that began and ended. Jesus has not always been with God, since the beginning of time, and is not with him until the end of time. It's just, this goes to show the massive amount of confusion that the Trinity has caused, right? And the Quran responds to this in the simplest way possible. إِنَّ مَثَلَ عِيسَى عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ آدَمَ خَلَقَهُ مِنْ تُرَابٍ. The parable of Isa in the sight of God is that of Adam. Why is this too complicated? You're all making it such an issue because he had this miraculous virgin birth. Well, Adam also had some miraculous creation. He came out of nothing. Are you going to attribute divinity to Adam as well, right? So the Quran does address that, and this is important. It's important for us as Muslims, to fortify our own faith, but it's also important to start these conversations, gentle conversations with Christians and Jews around us, who are considered the people of the book. They are considered Ahlul Kitab. So they have this sort of like protected status, so to speak, in the Islamic tradition, and we are admonished to engage them in conversations with respect. And if the conversations becomes tense, we're asked to stop, right? We talked about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and how she was raised, and how she was taken care of and supported by Zakaria alayhi salam, and how many scholars consider Maryam to actually have been a female prophet in her own right. We talked about her resilience and how her faith actually inspired Zacharias, right, to intensify his own prayers, his dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking for a son that would become the heir of the Hebrew tradition. And so, as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him Yahya, or John the Baptist. By the way, sometimes if you look at the English rendering of some of those names, it may appear to be very different from the Arabic, right? Jesus starts with a J, but then Isa starts with Ain, right? If you actually take it back to Latin or Greek, it will not sound, very, very different, from the Arabic, right? In Latin and more ancient European languages, it was never a J in Jesus. By the way, it was what? It was a ya, it was a ha. Like, even the Mexicans, they say, the Spanish-speaking people, they still say Jesus, right, with a ha, right? But then, essentially, it was actually a ya or a, right? You see, like, Asa, in some of the Latin dialects, right? And so, the same with John. John sounds like it starts with a J, but that is such an anglicizing of a Latin word. It's not a J at all, right? It sounds actually more like Yahya. And so we talked about how Jibreel alayhi salam, the archangel Gabriel, came to Maryam in her temple and basically gave her the glad tidings that God is going to grant her a child, out of virgin birth, and that he will be called Al-Masih, Al-Masihu Isa ibn Maryam, the anointed one, right? The anointed one. And of course, all these incredible scholarly descriptions of Isa alayhi salam, Al-Masih, the Christ, the anointed one, her concern was, I am unmarried. How's this going to work, right? I am unmarried. And of course, it's unimaginable for an unmarried woman to have a child. And this has always been the case when you think about it. It doesn't matter if you were Muslim or Jewish or Christian. It has been the case until maybe 40, 50 years ago, when having children out of wedlock was completely normalized. But throughout all of humanity, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, some formalizing of a commitment. We're not animals. We're not animals. We're not in it for procreation, right? Don't worry. Someone else is going to have children. Humanity is not going to go extinct because you didn't have a child, right? So we don't have children because we have a desire to preserve the human race. We have children because we want to feel motherhood and fatherhood, because we want to feel that we care about, the youngsters in the family, because we want to nurture them, because we want to feel, that beautiful divine presence that is manifested in our children. And so to divorce having a child from all these other considerations is abominable. And I'm not just talking about this in religious terms. I'm talking about this in very practical terms. You look at what this led to in the modern age. Look at single mothers and their suffering and the struggling, and the mental health toll that took place. Look at the research and what it has shown financially, psychologically, socially, the impact on children that are raised by single mothers. The absence of a father is devastating. Research has shown time and time again that there are things that fathers must teach the children that moms simply cannot, right? And so the minute modern women gave up their chastity, or some at least, and gave access to men to just be with them intimately with absolutely no strings attached, and then she ends up having a child, we've seen what that has done to humanity. We've seen what that has done to modern society. And by the way, I want you to go back to the movies that you used to enjoy when you're younger, right? Because a lot of things that when we were kids and we were watching some of those, let's say cartoon movies, you watch some of those cartoon movies, you don't make much of it, you don't think about it. But when you grow older and you actually go and look back at the same movies, you're like, oh my God, I know what this means. Oh my God, how did this pass? This is not general material. These are all these subliminal messages that normalize certain behavior, that normalize children rebelling against their parents, that normalize the use of foul language, that normalize sexuality, that normalize obnoxious behavior, right? And so and if you go back to, I still remember this, there was this movie like Independence Day, right? And this was released like in the late 1990s, right? And so if you go back and watch the movie, one of the most endearing characters in the movie, is like acting like a homosexual, right? And he was never mentioned explicitly in the movie, but you get to really relate to that person and really like that person, and then that person ends up, getting killed by a meteor. Oh man! And then you start feeling sad. So it instills in your head, the notion that, there's nothing wrong with this type of behavior, and that we should just accept it and we should be okay with it, right? This happens with homosexuality. It happens with liberal ideals. It happens with Zionism, the notion, the Holocaust that is constantly being imposed on us in every single movie and in every single narrative. Even like little things, like the word Israel, right, is always used as an example of a respected foreign country with a very respected intelligence, very respected industry, and they're always capable and always talked about in the most positive way. Right? Again, preparing your mind that when the time comes and that entity is committing a genocide, that you will have a hard time accepting it. Because ever since you're a child, this word is always synonymous to victimization, is always synonymous to, strength, synonymous to democracy. Oh, the only democracy in the Middle East, surrounded by all these monsters that are trying to destroy it. This is haven, this refuge, right? And so you don't know. The vast majority of people are not going to go visit. And so you grow up, and you look back at this, and you're like, man, there's no way. There's no way that they would do such a thing. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, alhamdulillah, this is changing, for sure. But I think what I'm saying is that this is the way that popular culture conditions our minds. This is the way that songs and movies condition our minds. It was unimaginable, 30, 40, 50 years ago when rap and hip-hop, started coming out, representing the resistance of the African American, the black community against the established status quo, and talking about resistance and pushing back and protecting your own community and maintaining your values and maintaining your culture, somehow over time evolved into songs about gold-plated AK-47s and gold-plated Oldsmobiles and skimpily clad women and talking about private parts and talking about cash and throwing cash in the air and talking about alcohol and talking about drugs. It's unimaginable. The degradation that has taken place. And we are on the receiving end of all of this. We're not music makers, we're not in the record industry. 99% of us, we have nothing to do with all of it. We're just consuming this material. And we are sitting there allowing our kids to consume this material, or It's now on public television. People are able to see this on YouTube everywhere. The songs that are filthiest, they have the highest views. It's actually like, exactly like that. The filthier the song is, the more disgusting and sick the song is, the higher the views, right? So again, we're all conditioned. Even music producers are being conditioned, right? Your lyrics will have to involve these things. The music video will have to involve that. You need to be doing these things. You need to be performing these acts. Otherwise, it's not going to be a successful song. Right? So this conditioning takes place to both the producer and the consumer, and we are all victimized, so drastically, by all of this. And so going back to Maryam, what Maryam was having an issue with, even though the message is coming to her from God through the angel, he's telling her you're going to have a baby, she doesn't pay attention to any of this, and she focuses on one thing. How am I going to have a baby when I'm unmarried? And last time I told you I don't like using the word single, because the word single still normalizes extramarital relationships. Because single people can still, be having their own fun. They're just not in a committed relationship, but they're single. Whereas the word unmarried is just more straightforward and simpler. Married, you are with someone that you commit your life to, and you can have intimate relations with that person. Anything beyond that is wrong and is haram, right? In every culture, that has always been the case, right? So that was Maryam's biggest concern. Okay, anointed one, Al-Masih, Christ, Jesus, I get it. All this is fine and dandy, but I'm unmarried. How is this going to work? كَذَلِكَ اللَّهُ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. The response came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus it was, the Lord does whatever He wills, right? Meaning that this was going to be a miracle. The Quran does not mention all the historic details, simply because not all the historic details are relevant, to the ethical teachings. We are focused on ethical teachings, and so not every historic detail is important. But we know, right, that the historic Jesus did exist, as opposed to the historic Moses. We believe in the existence of Musa alayhi salam because we are men and women of faith, but the historic Moses cannot be established. The Egyptians had a habit of erasing the history of the defeated, and they would only put the history of the victors, right? And so why would they put on their temples the story of Musa alayhi salam delivering the Hebrews? That would be an admission of defeat. So they would not do that. It was completely the erasure of the story of the Hebrews from Egyptian temple has been absolutely successful. You don't see it anywhere. So we don't know about the historic Musa, but we know about the historic Isa, Jesus. We know that he existed as a person, right? We also know that Banu Israel, that the Hebrews at the time, they did not necessarily like Jesus very much, okay? And this is the most astounding thing, like one of the most effective and the most successful tools of modern day Zionism is that it even removed from the equation the people that are responsible for the alleged murder of Jesus. It's amazing to me that even modern day Christians, like if I'm Muslim and I know that there is a particular group of people murdered my prophet, will I come 1,000 years later and say, oh, that group of people, this is God's chosen people. We have to really take care of them and give them free rein to murder others and to commit genocide because, hey, they're God's chosen people. But dude, they allegedly murdered your prophet. No, we don't want to talk about this. This is anti-Semitism. We don't want to talk about this. Now, I am not, obviously, I think it goes without saying that it would be the stupidest and most foolish thing to somehow assume that modern day Jews are responsible for the alleged murder of Jesus. That would be obviously stupid. It's not what we're saying either. We are not foolish to assume that all Jews in the world were somehow colluding to murder Jesus. Got to be like a 2-year-old to believe in something like this. So the point is not to make anti-Semitic statements either. The point is just to state that historically speaking, it was the Jews of Jerusalem that played the biggest role in the alleged crucifixion of Jesus. How is this even escapable? In fact, the Roman governor of Judea, And his name reminds me of the Pilates, activities. It's Pilates. They call him Pilates or something like this, right? I think his first name was Pontius Pilates, or Pilates. Americans and how they mess up the words, right? Pontius Pilates, Pilates, right? It was not pilots, it was Pilates or something, Pilate, whatever it is. But this guy essentially refused. He was opposed to punishing Jesus because he actually liked him. And they say that there is all these narratives that Pilates, after the so-called crucifixion of Jesus, he left and he went back to Rome. And some say that he was executed by the Romans, and some say that he converted to Christianity, and some say that he just gave up public life because he felt so bad about what he did, right? And so he was not in the business of getting involved in Jewish affairs anyway. He received very clear instructions. Let these minorities kind of do their own thing, right? It was the rabbis that actually started accusing Jesus of sedition. They started accusing Jesus of subverting the system. This is absolute clear history in both Jewish and Christian sources, by the way. Just somehow in modern times, we don't talk about this. We don't talk about that part, right? And so it was the rabbis of the temple that started accusing Maryam, the mother of Jesus, of lewd behavior. They accused her that she had affairs with this other guy's name was, Joseph, Yusuf al-Najjar. And they accused him that he is trying to claim or proclaim himself as the king of the Jews, which is obviously an act of rebellion against the Roman Empire. Romans, you going to let this stand? Are you going to do something about it or not? Now, the rabbis themselves had no authority to take a life because, they were all civilians. It was only the Roman governor that had that authority. So finally, they convinced him by showing that, this guy is out to get all of us, not just us Jews, but everyone else. They were Jewish priests that did this. And again, it's not anti-Semitic to state historical facts. Okay, not all Jews were responsible for this. Jesus was innocent of these accusations. And there are actually many Jews that ended up following him, and they became his disciples, and they became his most ardent followers, right? And so it's not, we don't make any generalizations. So ultimately, Pilates, or Pilates, he decided to execute Isa alayhi salam. And the most favored instrument of execution for the Romans at that time was what? Crucifixion on the cross. And so they would usually hurt you and bleed you and flog you first, and then they would nail you to a cross, basically, and let you kind of die over a few days, from bleeding and exposure and so forth. And sometimes they would have mercy on you, and they would drive a spear into your belly and kind of be done with it. There's actually this priest this Christian priest, who maybe like 30, 40 years after Jesus, who was arrested by the Romans and was taken from Jerusalem, and he was taken to the Roman Empire, to Rome. His name was Saint Ignatius. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. So Saint Ignatius wrote 7 letters. This is well known, by the way. This is well known. And he wrote 7 letters on his way to Rome because they executed him, by the way. So he's considered shaheed. He's considered a shaheed because the Romans executed Saint Ignatius. You know how the Romans were. They were obviously opposed to all Christians at that time. So they executed him by throwing him to the lions in one of their gladiatorial arenas. But before he was killed, Saint Ignatius wrote 7 letters. In one of his letters, he was basically talking about the struggles in the Christian community about the nature and essence of Jesus. He says, I'm struggling. I'm trying to understand. Some say he was God. Some say he's the Son of God. Some say he's just a man, flesh and blood, with a virgin birth, right? And this is the most dividing conversation within our community, right? He was executed shortly thereafter. But here's the thing. In the Islamic understanding, we all know that we do not accept the crucifixion of Jesus. We do not accept that. As central as it is to Christian theology, we do not accept it, right? But some people think, oh, yeah, it's just Muslims, Muslims have this weird view about Jesus that he was not. No. There's so many Christian groups that did not accept the crucifixion of Jesus either. Now, those groups kind of went extinct over time, right? But so many, and St. Ignatius talks about this. In fact, there are mentions to the fact that Jesus survived the entire ordeal in some of the Gnostic and some of the apocryphal Gospels that I talked to you about before. These are Gospels that have not been included in the Gospel of the Catholic Church, the Bible that we know it today. They were not included in that. Nonetheless, you can find those online if you search. The manuscripts are still available. We know that they exist, and we know what's in there. They're just not formally included. So it's like taking Surat Al-Imran out of the Quran. Like, Al-Azhar scholars and the scholars of Deoband, they come together and say, you know what? We're just going to remove Al-Imran from the Quran. The Quran is going to be 113 instead of 114 surahs. Like, this is literally what the Catholic Church did. Removed multiple Gospels from the book, and what remains became what is today considered to be the Bible. So there's all these notions about what happened to Jesus. Because remember, when we ended it last time, I think it was ayah number 52. فَلَمَّا أَحَسَّ عِيسَى مِنْهُمُ الْكُفْرَ قَالَ مَنْ أَنصَارِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. When Isa realized that they are rejecting him, he started leaning on his most ardent supporters, and those were, the Essenians. If I told you last times, the Essenian order, or the Essene Brotherhood, some they call it. These were, white cloaked men who were obviously Jewish, but when they converted to Christianity and they followed, Isa, I actually shouldn't say converted to Christianity. They just remained Muslim by following Isa alayhi salam. And they were, they're called Al-Hawariyin in the Quran. And Hawari is translated as disciple, but linguistically, actually, it just means someone who's, cloaked in white, or someone who's dressed in white. And so Al-Hawariyin, the disciples of Jesus, most likely, and we found this in the Dead Sea Scrolls, most likely they are a representation of the Essenian, Essenian, the Essenian Brotherhood, or the Essenian order. These are the most ardent, the most zealous followers of Isa alayhi salam. They became his disciples. So when he realized that the established rabbinical order in the temple is against him, he started leaning on the support of his closest disciples, and the rest is history, as they say. That's when we diverge in views. Christians would say that Judas came and in public, hugged him or kissed him, and this is how he signaled the Roman soldiers to recognize him as Jesus, which is kind of weird. I mean, he was a public figure, and everyone knew who he was. Do you really need to be identified by a kiss from your disciples? That was kind of strange. Like the Romans didn't need someone to tell them who Jesus was. But beside the point, he was picked up, and then he was tortured. He was crucified, and that's when he died. The Quran says something a little bit different. Look at ayah 56. إِذْ قَالَ اللَّهُ يَا عِيسَى إِنِّي مُتَوَفِّيكَ وَرَافِعُكَ إِلَيَّ. Mutawaffika, he said, Jesus, verily, I shall cause you to die, and I shall exalt you and elevate you to me. I will bring you to me. So the Muslim scholars don't have any disagreement about the fact that Jesus was not crucified. And they all agree on it. And many Christians, especially ancient Christians, they also supported the notion that Jesus was not crucified. So who was crucified then? Because someone died on that cross. So there's theories about this. Some say that it was one of his disciples that kind of looked like him and volunteered for the job. Some say that it was Judas his last name was Iscariot, right? Judas Iscariot. that Judas, when he kissed him, he was kind of made to look like him, and then the Roman soldiers picked Judas instead of Jesus, and he was crucified in his stead. Some say that it was actually one of the Roman soldiers. And Imam Razi, by the way, has this incredible notion where he says that when Pilates arrested him and he was in prison being tortured, Pilates himself did not like the prospect of murdering this good man, so he actually put up one of his other prisoners that kind of looked like Jesus to be crucified in Jesus' stead. All kinds of interesting theories, and what Muslims agree upon, however, is that Jesus was not crucified. It wasn't him that died on the cross, right? It was somebody else. But what happened to Jesus after that is where Muslim scholars disagree greatly. So some scholars say that he was elevated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately thereafter in the flesh, alive. And some say that he actually died of natural causes and was elevated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's interesting because if you look at this particular ayah, 56, it says, Inni mutawaffika wa rafi'uka ilay. I will cause you to die. Wafa means death. And then I will elevate you. وَمُطَهِّرُكَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. And I will cleanse you from the actions of those who rejected the truth. وَجَاعِلُ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوكَ فَوْقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. And I will make your true followers always above, and they will always have an advantage over those who have rejected you until the day of judgment. All right? So this is obviously, fascinating stuff. It's interesting to kind of navigate the Christian versus the Muslim narrative, about all of this. But again, Muslims agree that Jesus was not crucified. They just disagree what happened to him after. So some scholars say that he was elevated alive, and some scholars say that no, he just died naturally without being tortured. He died at home, and then he was elevated. The point is, Muslims also believe, this is something else that is not related to this, but something that is worth mentioning. Muslims also believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And then what's the Messiah going to do? The Messiah is going to come back at the end of times, right? And so this kind of reinforces the notion that maybe Jesus is alive, that he did not die. But then you also have some of these other scholars that would say, wait, if Jesus comes back at the end of time, then there is a prophet that came after Muhammad, which means that the Prophet ﷺ was not Khatamun Nabiyyin. So they actually reject, that notion as well. So you see these interesting theological debates that I personally don't find to be super useful anyway. I mean, we can debate these things in like academic circles and Islamic theology programs, we can do that. I don't think that this has much of an impact on what we do today. Whether Jesus comes back at the end of time or not, is a matter that will be decided. We cross that bridge when we get there, okay? Who wants to be around when the Antichrist is here and Dajjal and all that? Ya'juj and Ma'juj are ravaging the world? Not me, right? I want to be gone, inshallah, before, if we're struggling with Trump and Netanyahu and these maniacs, imagine when the world is led by the Antichrist and that the IDF is replaced by Gog and Magog. No thanks. Definitely don't want to be around when that day comes, right? So it doesn't concern me as much. What concerns me is what affects our faith here and now. What concerns me is the Christian narrative, the Christian aqidah, the Christian creed vis-a-vis ours. And what concerns me is what do we say about the Trinity, and what do we say about the advantage that Islam has, over the rather convoluted, Christian doctrine. All right. And again, going back to ayah number 59 that I just mentioned earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Inna mathala Isa inda Allahi kamathali Adam." Verily, in the sight of God, the nature of Jesus is as the nature of Adam. Both were created from this earth. Right? If there's something miraculous about Jesus, well, there's something miraculous about Adam as well. Will you attribute divinity to him the way you did to Jesus? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, like I said, this is not meant to ostracize and attack the Christians. This is meant to just clarify certain truths, to kind of dissect and analyze the doctrine, carefully, gently, and, without being so loud about it. And so what matters to us essentially is, at the end of the day, Christians are not going to disappear from the world. Jews are not going to disappear from the world, right? We still have to find a way to coexist. And this is why thabat is so important. Because steadfastness, when I was in college, there's people that lost their faith. They became atheists because they're like, well, there's way too many religions, everyone claims to be the correct one, they must all be wrong. So they lose faith in God because there's so many different ways of worshiping God. Like, that never made any sense to me. But it is true, though, that the mere existence of multiple paths to God may cause some people to lose their faith, or it may weaken their faith. And so at the end of the day, I have to realize that I don't live in the world by myself, that there are other faiths out there, and we're not supposed to be at war with each other. We still have to find a way to coexist and a way to cultivate this earth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so ayah number 64 makes such proclamation. Now that we've analyzed the Christian doctrine, and now that we've achieved some steadfastness against these alternative ideologies, we take a little zoom out, right? قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. O followers of earlier revelations, O people of the book, come, let us agree on one tenet that we could all hold in common. What is that tenet that all of us at least agree upon? Is that there is one God. Can we at least agree on that? The ayah says. So it doesn't say if you don't follow Islam, and if you don't follow the Prophet Muhammad, and if you reject the Quran, you're going to be punished, and you're going to be erased, and you're going to be displaced. Alhamdulillah. There's still Christians in the Muslim world, 1400 years after the Prophet Muhammad. There's still Jews in the Muslim world. In fact, where is the most thriving Jewish community out of... see what the brother said? The most thriving Jewish community out of the land of Palestine is not the one in New York. It's the one in Iran. Iran, that is constantly vilified and attacked, they are more than tolerant to their local Jewish community. Right. Right. Thriving business owners, they have their synagogues, they have their own events. The Islamic law is not imposed on them. There was thank you. There was a substantial, still is, by the way, a substantial Jewish community in Morocco. There is a substantial Jewish community in Turkey. Why? Why Turkey, Iran, and Morocco in particular? Because during the Spanish Inquisition, when the Jews were being tortured by the Christians, by the way, and they were being told with the swords on their necks, it's either you become Christian or you will be murdered, or you have to leave the country. They decided to go where? They either went to, they were in Spain, right? But they went south. They crossed, the Mediterranean into Morocco, into the Muslim world from, down south, North Africa, or they went eastward into the Ottoman Empire because they figured these crazy Christians, they're super intolerant. The only group of people that will actually take us in has to be the Muslims, right? And a lot of people don't know it, and I'm telling you, modern day Zionism has been so successful in conditioning people's minds. The founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, in the late 1800s, his destination was actually not Palestine. Where'd you want to go? Initially, he wanted to go to Argentina. But he decided that, you know what, it's probably dangerous to go to Argentina and make it like a home for all the Jews. Let's just go to Palestine better. Why? Because Muslims are going to be tolerant. Because Christians have never been tolerant of us. Muslims are going to take care of us. Of course, I should be able to say that, you know, Zionism, which started off as a decent premise, you know, to provide safe haven for the Jews that were being, you know, persecuted around the world. I get the notion, but I think it started a very secular movement. It was not religious at all, and then over time, it took a completely different direction, took a completely different turn, and then it became a matter of displacing people. You go into a land that already has people that have welcomed you, that have sold you homes and properties and land, that have said it's okay, you're my brother, you can live here with us. Now, over a couple of decades, you start turning against the landowners, and now you want to displace them and steal not only their land or their homes, you want to steal their history, you want to steal their culture, you want to steal their food, you want to steal their music. There's Zionists now that say dabka is an Israeli dance. They say hummus is Israeli food. They say falafel is my favorite Israeli food. Can you believe this? Like the utter theft of a people. Everything about them, we're just going to go ahead and steal. You know, it's like Americans saying, my favorite American food is enchiladas. Right? It's crazy. But that's exactly what they're doing, right? So it took that completely twisted turn where now they're just in the business of stealing everything that belongs to the native inhabitants of that land, all right? So again, you know, the ayah says, we're going to live together. At least let's agree on that one thing. Kalimatin sawa, one common ground, which is God is one, the universe has one God, and let's serve that one God without, you know, having these other notions. وَلَا يَتَّخِذُوا بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ. And let us not take one another as lords, as gods in Allah's stead. Meaning, let's not put human beings on the pedestal of God. Let's not allow human beings to make laws on behalf of God. And we see this, by the way, like we see how rabbis and priests, I just gave you earlier the example, you know, again, this is sort of like tacit criticism. It's tacit criticism. When you see like the Catholic Convention or some of these, you know, church meetings that would come and kind of change Christian law, they change Christian doctrine. You know, they add and remove gospels to the Bible at will. Then you see how man intervenes in the business of God, and then how man elevates himself to be at the level of God. You see the same, by the way, you know, in modern times with even Muslim clerics who would, you know, kind of suspend certain teachings at will. Oh, you know, this is not appropriate for our times. This was for ancient times. Really? You know, if you say that there are teachings of the Quran that are time-bound, then you're basically saying that all the teachings of the Quran are time-bound. Once you have given exemption to one, you have basically given exemption to all. We can't do that, right? Now, what if the Christians and the Jews and people of the book, they refuse the common denominator? Then we exact our punishment upon them and show them who's boss? No. The ayah says, فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَقُولُوا اشْهَدُوا بِأَنَّا مُسْلِمُونَ. If they refused, if they rejected, then say, I want you to be our witness that we will be the true Muslims then. We will surrender ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do what you want to do. We've just advised you. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what you want. There's absolutely no compulsion. It doesn't say punish or conquer or harm. It just says be a witness that we will do the right thing as ourselves. And then the discussion shifts, you know, after this. It zooms out a little. Because now we talked about the Christians mostly, a little bit about the Jews as well, but we zoom out and talk about all of Ahlul Kitab, people of the previous scriptures, right? Jews, Christians, even, you know, the scriptures that predate Judaism and Christianity, and we talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam in particular, right? So look at 65. I'm sorry, 65. يا أهل الكتاب لما تحاجون في إبراهيم. Why are you so... There was all these claims by Jews and Christians about Ibrahim alayhi salam. You know, the Jews basically say Ibrahim is ours. The Christians say Ibrahim is ours. I mean, he's the patriarch. I think we can all lay claim to Ibrahim, Muslims, Jews, and Christians. We're all Abrahamic, right? But they say Ibrahim, the Jews will say Ibrahim was Jewish, and the Christians will say, well, Ibrahim is Christian. Well, dude, he predated both. He cannot be called Jewish or Christian. Rather, you know, as the Quran says, right? And look at 67. ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصرانيا. Ibrahim was neither Jewish nor Christian. ولكن كان حنيفا مسلما. The word Hanif, by the way, is interesting. Muslim, we know what Muslim means, but Hanif is interesting. Hanif means the one that always walks away from filth, walks away from haram, you know, walks away from things that are unclean, that are impure. So he wasn't just Muslim, he had this beautiful nature to him, alayhi wa ala nabiyina salatu wassalam. So the Jews claimed that Ibrahim was Jewish, Christians claimed that he was Christian, and that makes no sense. Quran says, Hanifan Muslima, turns away from falsehood and surrenders to God. Wouldn't it be amazing that the natural inclination of the heart is to turn away from falsehood? That we're not even tempted in the first place? Like you have a business opportunity that is haram and oh man, and then you're so upset that you don't take it, but you force yourself because I don't want to do something haram. I don't want to go to hell, man. But what if the natural inclination is to not even think about that? You know, it's just, I can't. What? That's unacceptable. I can't, I don't even have the desire to do something that is haram and filthy and displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just by the nature of the heart and not the decision of the mind, you know, so to speak. So, you know, being Muslim obviously being Muslim is the common denominator between all of us, but not every single one of us is Hanif. Not single one of us naturally deviates from filth. Many times we just dance around filth. We dance around haram things. We dance around sin, dance around gossip, dance around immodesty, dance around zina, right? You know, dance around taking something that is not ours, you know, putting our money in halal ventures. We just dance around it, and then we keep finding excuses, and then we go to the imam and try to get a fatwa. That's not someone who's being Hanif. Hanif is just, you know what, I want to be 64 miles away from this thing. I don't even want to consider it, right? 68. إن أولى الناس بإبراهيم للذين اتبعوه. Behold, the people who have the best claim to Ibrahim are surely those who follow Ibrahim. What was Ibrahim about? And follow Ibrahim, and then you can lay claim to Ibrahim. Subhanallah. The word awla, by the way, in Arabic is a very important word, because this is the same word that the Prophet ﷺ used when he came to Medina and he realized that the Jews were fasting on the day of Ashura, which passed, right, a few days ago. So he asked them, why are you fasting today? I mean, these were citizens of the community. He respected them. He signed treaties with them. They felt safe and respected. So, you know, in one of the interfaith dialogues, he's asking them, why are you fasting, you know, on this day? And he says, you know, that is the day of the Exodus. We commemorate the day of the Exodus when God delivered, you know, Musa and the Israelites from Egypt. So he said to them, نحن أولى بموسى منكم. He used the same word, نحن أولى. We are more deserving to lay claim to the legacy of Musa than you guys, because we are the Muslims and we definitely take what Musa alayhi salam did seriously. And I always say that the concept of nahnu awla sets the precedence for the spirit of excellence in Islam. Like, this is a practice of the Jews. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam adopted it, and it became a religious practice for us that we still practice to this day. Imagine if that is always your approach. So you see, one of the things that always inspire me is that if you go to almost every Catholic church, they're always serving food every single day. Rain or shine, 365 days of the year. It's astounding. Like when we do our monthly feed with Tarbiyah Giving Back, it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of fundraising every single month. It's like, oh my God, this is so tedious to put this thing together. Well, Catholics do this every single day, which tells you that there's always good people out there that are willing to give their money to feed the poor. Isn't that amazing? Like you see Catholics do this, you should say to yourself, نحن أولى. We as Muslims should be the ones to do this. We deserve that legacy, and we lay more claim to that legacy of charity than anyone. Why are the Christians doing it and we're not doing it? What's that? The Sikhs do that as well. Yeah, I actually didn't know that. Every day? Wow. That's crazy. These are things that as Muslims, we see something beautiful and we say, I got to do that. But it's not just at the community level, by the way. It's also at the personal level. When you see someone that is kind and you are just obnoxious, I really need to be more careful with my language. I'm Muslim. I can't just be so aggressive. I can't be so judgmental. I have to be kind. Look at that person. They're not even Muslim, but so kind in their attitude. I got to become like this, right? Every form of wisdom that you see anywhere, it doesn't matter who's practicing it. If it's a good thing, you say to yourself, نحن أولى. We are more deserving of that legacy because we're Muslim. We're supposed to be doing this and more. Now imagine if you do this in your life in general. Like if you work and you are an employee and you are the worst performing employee, I work for the government, so what are they going to do to me? Like fire me? Like when was the last time you heard of a government employee that was fired? It's the most safe position ever, and I make $120,000 a year, and I have all these perks, and I have all these benefits, and I can do whatever I want. I show up to work whenever I want. I leave whenever I want. I come to Jum'ah. I have time to come to Jum'ah, and I'm able to enjoy myself, and I come to the masjid on a regular basis. Yes, but how is your job performance? No, it doesn't matter. Is that acceptable? Like they talk about it like it's the absolute norm. It's like, okay, you were blessed with a stable job. How about do your job? Wouldn't that be nice? How about actually deliver? And so if you see someone that is performing, and I'm not saying like become a slave to a corporate company either, or work your behind off for the state of California that really doesn't care much about you or your well-being. It has to be a balance. You're getting paid for 7-8 hours a day. You got to deliver and a little more. Okay? Don't overwork yourself and leave work at 11:30 p.m. every single night. I see some brothers that work for Intel. I was like, you don't own Intel, dude. You just is a random person. They will crush you in 1 second. If the numbers are not looking right, they will delete you, erase you like you never existed. Why are you going home at 11:30 p.m. every night? You're not spending any time with your family. That's the other extreme. The people work very little and people work, very, very hard. Find the balance and say, I can't take home money that I have not earned. I am more deserving of the legacy of being professional. If you see someone that always shows up on time, we start making fun of them, by the way. You're all goody-goody, always showing up on time, right? And then we take pride in just being late all the time. And then as people have come to expect that. If you see someone that is always prompt, say to yourself, I gotta be like this. نحن أولى. We are more deserving of that legacy because fulfilling promises is so important in our own Islamic tradition. And you can take this spirit of excellence and really apply it to everything. It can truly be life-changing, right? So we follow Ibrahim alayhi salam, by following his legacy, by following his actions, and not just laying claim to him. 72. وقالت طائفة من أهل الكتاب آمنوا بالذي أنزل على الذين آمنوا وجه النهار واكفروا بآخره. Some of the people of the book, and this happened in Medina, by the way, some of the people of the book, they started saying, by way of pushing back against Islam, trying to absorb, the new faith, they started pushing back by saying to each other, you know what? We will partially accept some Quranic truths. We will say that we agree with this and we agree with this and we agree with that, but we disagree with these other things. This way, we are not being unreasonable because the Quran does teach amazing things, but at the same time, we're not embracing it in full, and so we will cause confusion. And then maybe the followers, of Islam themselves, they're going to start being selective as well in the way that they follow the faith, right? This is a very effective method, and it still happens to this day. Like you see some of our non-Muslim friends, they will come to our kids and they will say, I actually appreciate, family values in Islam, but I don't know about the 5 daily prayers. This is so ancient. It's so archaic. And so you'll find some Muslims today who are also being selective in the way that they practice the faith, right? They would adopt certain things from the faith and from the culture and from the history, but then they would drop other things as archaic or as unnecessary, and then I become the one who decides. Am I supposed to be the one who decides? It's either that you take Islam as a package or you don't. Now, not everyone we're not perfect. We will always fall behind. The point is not, I need to be absolutely perfect in practicing Islam. But the point is to acknowledge that this is the standard. And I will do what I can to reach that standard. So you cannot just summarily decide there are these aspects of the faith or these parts of the Quran that don't sit well with me, therefore I'm not going to follow them. So it was, the Jews in Medina, some of them at least, some of the Jews in Medina says, let's be reasonable. We're going to acknowledge certain truths, So it almost looks like the first half of the day, during the day, we're going to accept Islam, but then the second half of the day, we're going to reject it because we are being selective in which part we are following. So this partial acceptance of certain Quranic truths and rejecting, others, and this obviously defies the notion of submission. There are practices or certain teachings in the Quran that may not be entirely in line with modern practices or modern cultural paradigms. Does that mean it's wrong? Well, culture changes and evolves all the time. What is accepted today was not accepted 20 years ago and will become something else altogether in 20 years. Is religion supposed to be subject, to all of this evolution? Obviously not. So the Quran, in its attempt to enhance this thabat, this steadfastness of the believers, also makes fair statements about the people of the book. So it can't just be criticism. You also have to make fair statements. Otherwise, when all of our statements are being unfair, then we're just sounding hyperbolic. And if it's just hyperbole that you are issuing all the time, no one's going to take you seriously, because spectators will be able to tell. Well, they're not all bad. Some of the things that they do are actually good and kind. So look at the next ayah that I wanted to point your attention to, which is 75. وَمِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ مَنْ إِنْ تَأْمَنْهُ بِقِنْطَارٍ يُؤَدِّهِ إِلَيْكَ. And among the people of the book, there are many who, when you entrust them with a treasure, they will faithfully restore it to you. They're very honest. Some are, right? وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ إِنْ تَأْمَنْهُ بِدِينَارٍ لَا يُؤَدِّهِ إِلَيْكَ. Some of them, if you entrust them with even one coin, they don't give it back. In other words, what the Quran is saying, that every community, just like ours by the way, has both good and bad. Don't make generalizations. Don't label people. That's the problem of labeling. This person is this, that person is that. And then you judge them based on their associations, not based on who they are or what they do. We're not supposed to be judging people based on their associations. Neither are we supposed to judge them based on who they are. We're supposed to judge them based on what? Based on what they do. We judge based on what they do. Okay? If this person is being dishonest, I'm not going to say, all these people are dishonest. It's funny because we are so quick. The human mind has to create labels because it's the easiest way to compartmentalize people. And it's a survival tactic. When I know that this group of people is like this and that group of people is like that, then for the future, my mind is telling me you need to avoid these people or you need to stick around with those people. But that is very, very harmful because there's always exceptions to every rule. And so some people who are not Muslim, they are very, very honest that if you entrust them with a treasure, they will give it back. And some of them are dishonest. If you entrust them with a coin, they won't give it back. Which is just another way of saying that some Muslims, if you entrust them with a treasure, if you entrust them with a coin, they will give it back. And if you entrust them with a treasure, they may not give it back. Isn't that true? We've all run into like bad business deals with certain Muslims. But the thing is, we are so quick to generalize when it comes to someone that belongs to another faith or that belongs to another group. With one another, we're always nuanced and we give the benefit of the doubt. But with someone else, all these Christians, all these Jews. I think that the recent conflict in Gaza has actually shown us very effectively that a lot of Jews are opposed to Zionism. A lot of Jews are entirely non-Zionist. They don't believe in some kind of a national home for the Jews. They believe that Jews should not be treated above all else. We've seen that. They have been some of the most proponents of the pro-Palestine movement were actually Jewish people. Or assume that all Spanish people, Latin-speaking people, like everyone that looks like a Mexican at Home Depot as ICE agents are going to be here, pick this guy up. This is all this assumptions, all illegal immigrants. So funny, like so unacceptable. When you know that the state that you live in actually was part of Mexico, and that it was acquired, quite unfairly into the American Union, at some point or the other. And so I'm not sure who is native and who's not. When you think about it, Mexican people who live here are the natives, and all of the rest of us are the illegal aliens. When you think about it, for all practical purposes, ICE should be arresting us, not the people of Latin origins. But again, it's the ironies of life. At the end of the day, it's about power. It's who holds power and who gets to make those decisions, right? And so there should be no labeling of people, and I know it's difficult because once you know that that person belongs to this group of people, I refrain, by the way, like when I'm telling stories, I usually refrain from mentioning the origin of that person because if I mentioned it, then people are going to make associations. So we have to be very careful not to even mention that part and treat everyone on their own merit. 77. إن الذين يشترون بعهد الله وأيمانهم ثمنا قليلا أولئك لا خلاق لهم. There's a story about a Sahabi, a man by the name of Al-Akhnas ibn Shurayq, Al-Akhnas ibn Qais. So in that story, he basically says that I had a dispute with a Jewish man about a land in Medina. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he seeks a judgment about this. And the Messenger ﷺ asks him, do you have any evidence? Do you have any deed? So Al-Ash'ath says, I don't know. I lost my deed of trust. So the Prophet ﷺ says, I cannot give it to you because the other man
occupies the land. He is the one that lives on the land and he occupies it. And so you're the one that's asking to remove him and for the land to be given to you. So it's your responsibility to provide evidence or proof. So he says, I don't have any proof, but he's lying. Messenger of God, ask him, he's lying. So the Prophet ﷺ asked the Jewish man, are you saying the truth? He says, yes. Is it your land? He says, absolutely. It's not this Al-Ash'ath, it's not his? He says, absolutely not. He says, are you willing to take an oath upon this? And the man says, 100%. And Al-Ash'ath said to the Prophet ﷺ, Messenger of God, he will take an oath. He doesn't care. Liars, they'll take oaths. He says, I can't help you beyond this. If he lives on the land and he took an oath that it's his, and you cannot provide evidence that it's yours, then I have to, judge to his favor. But here's the problem. If the Jewish man actually was lying, and Al-Ash'ath is saying the truth, just the fact that the judge made a judgment in favor of the Jewish man, does that absolve him of moral responsibility? Absolutely not. Because we can adjudicate these affairs between us, between each other as human beings. But at the end of the day, you know what you're entitled to and what you're not. So let's say that you had a business dispute with someone who used to be a business partner, and you guys are fighting over money, and you sue that person, and you ended up taking most of the money, and you know it's not yours. I don't care. The judge said it's mine. Is this the proper Islamic attitude? In fact, there's a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ says, you will come to me for disputes, and some of you will be more eloquent than the others, and I might rule to your favor. But you need to know that me ruling to your favor means nothing. When you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will still be punished because you've taken something that is not yours. Right? So the ayah here says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَشْتَرُونَ بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ وَأَيْمَانِهِمْ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. Those who barter away the promise that they have made to God for a trifling gain. They have made a promise to God to be honest, but they give that away for some immediate or expedient gain. Allah subhanahu, and then they take an oath upon it. Allah says, He, God, will neither speak to them nor will look upon them. This is the first punishment. Allah will never talk to them. Allah will never look upon them. Now imagine that God doesn't hear your prayers and God doesn't look upon you with His eye of mercy. This is the worst punishment. And then after that it says, وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ. He does not cleanse them or purify them of their sins. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And then they will experience severe torment or the punishment of hellfire. This actually comes late. It comes as the last one. Because the torment of hellfire is not as severe as God doesn't hearing your prayers and God does not looking upon you with His mercy or cleansing you from your sin. These are far more severe punishments from God than the punishment of hellfire. See the order? The order tells it all. So we're supposed to self-regulate. We're supposed to decide, is this really like, do I believe my own lies? Do I believe my own lies? I can't be stupid. I can lie, to gain something. I can lie to protect myself, to save my face. But I can't lie to myself. I have to be honest with myself at least. If I'm dishonest with everyone, I have to be honest with myself. So are you really going to go through with this? Are you going to sue this person and take something that is definitely not yours? Are you going to be okay with that? You're going to be okay taking money that is not yours and feeding your kids off of this? When you have harmed someone else, you're going to be okay with that just because you got a judgment? It means absolutely nothing. And if you are willing to swear, if you're willing to take an oath in order to take something that is not yours, well, you got to bear the consequences. He's not going to hear you. He's not going to look at you. He's not going to cleanse you, and you will definitely be punished in the afterlife. 78 speaks further to a similar notion. وَإِنَّ مِنْهُمْ لَفَرِيقًا يَلْوُونَ أَلْسِنَتَهُمْ بِالْكِتَابِ لِتَحْسَبُوهُ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَمَا هُوَ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ وَمَا هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. See? And behold, there are indeed some among them, the same people, some among them who distort the book with their tongues so as to make you think that what they say is from the book when it's not from the book, or they say it's from God when it's not from God. So this distortion, when you make claims that that are very eloquent and very sophisticated, and you're using the right words in order to make it sound like it is from God when it's not from God. One of the things that was just mind-boggling to me, I don't know if you guys watched that video. I have to mention his name publicly because he did this publicly. Millions of views on social media. We all grew up, as kids, we grew up listening to Sheikh Sudais. He was the Imam of, Al-Haram al-Makki, the Grand Mosque in Mecca. He has this iconic voice in reciting the Quran that we grew up with. We're very, very familiar with him. I've never, when I started doing Umrah, in like my early 20s, I usually don't appreciate Jum'ah in Saudi Arabia in general. Because just the way the khutbah is, it's very short, it's very repetitive, and then it's dictated on them by the government, and they have to read it from a piece of paper, and it always ends with some prayer to the king and stuff like that, which I'm a rebel. I can't accept it. I don't accept these things, right? I'm the guy, put me anywhere, I'll be like always on the side of opposition, everywhere, right? So just to schmooze and do the boot licking when you're an imam and you're praying, for the king. You know what? I always let it go because I understand they're probably going to put him in jail or, do something bad to him if he does not pray, for the king. And the crown prince as well. Like they have to do both. You have to pray for the king and for the crown prince, which is the norm, unfortunately, in those Gulf countries. But then recently, I think it was the conflict between India and Pakistan, right? And then the Muslim world was celebrating, how efficient, the Pakistani Air Force was, and how, the operation ended in like 2 hours when the Indians freaked out. Everyone was celebrating, and then Sheikh Sudais goes on TV, and then he uses the Quran to say, we follow what our leaders say. We follow our rulers. Good, bad, halal, haram, it doesn't matter to us. Good, evil, doesn't matter to us. If the ruler says, go back, by the way, verify on your own, don't take my word for it. If the ruler says, side with the Hindus against the Muslims, we side with the Hindus against the Muslims. He said it explicitly like this.
So ruler is what?
His ruler, of course. He's talking about Mohammed bin Salman, but whatever it is. Whatever the king says, whatever the crown prince says, it doesn't matter. If he says dance, I'll dance.
It's that, I think it's the hadith also, where they use that hadith where Rasulullah says if you have a ruler, even if he is evil, but he's Muslim, you have to oblige to the ruler.
Of course, we can debate that, but you and I know that the Prophet ﷺ, who started a movement of subversion against the status quo, and against oppression, and against injustice, would somehow issue a statement that whatever the ruler says, you have to follow them and obey. You and I know that that cannot possibly be the essence of what he's saying, alayhi salatu wassalam. Yet someone will take the ayat of the Quran or the ayat of the ahadith, it says actually here, يَلْوُونَ أَلْسِنَتَهُم. They twist their tongues. The user to just twist the teachings in order to gain some wealth, in order to gain some favor, in order to, you know what? You don't have to say anything. Just continue with your approach, make dua for the king and make dua for the crown prince, and just shut up. Why do you have to go out of your way? And then not ever since, actually 2 years prior, he has been dedicating half of the khutbah to talk about MBS and how amazing he is. Really? Really? Like, it's not brainwashing. He knows exactly what he's doing. What's his name? The king. What's his name? Salman. Yeah, Salman himself, who by the way is still the king. His son is the crown prince, even though he's been, I think, everyone knows that he's brain dead or something like. Or maybe he's actually dead, and they're just dead for years. They just never announced it. So everyone knows that Mohammed bin Salman is the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, right? And so Salman had so many sons. I mean, I think like 20 something. One of them randomly became the crown prince. Somehow this one person that became randomly the crown prince is the repository of divine wisdom on earth. Like this is crazy. It's crazy. It could have been anyone else. You would have said the same exact thing about anyone else. Only prophets and messengers we speak about with such reverence because God selected them. But if someone ascends to power arbitrarily, that person cannot possibly be like any better than anyone else, except with his own actions, right? And so for me, it's just mind-boggling. And wallah, ever since, I don't listen to his Quranic recitation. You know, if I go do Umrah and he's leading the prayers, I'll probably just wait outside and like, I'm so upset. How do you pray behind people like this? How? How do you do that? Like someone who literally sold their faith, for some worldly gain. What will history say about you? By the way, don't get me wrong. Saudis are incredible people. There's a lot of incredible scholars that are actually rotting in jail today as we speak because they refuse to do that. They couldn't possibly do that. They couldn't sell their faith, for the favors of the king. All right? And so we have to also be careful with this, by the way, in our own conversations because sometimes you're trying to win an argument. So you take the Quran and you twist it in order to win the argument. Or you misplace the hadith. Or you misinterpret the ayah in order to achieve some immediate gain. It would fall under the same category. So we have to be extremely careful with this. 79. ما كان لبشر أن يؤتيه الله الكتاب والحكم والنبوة ثم يقول للناس كونوا عبادا لي. This ayah actually almost implies that the previous ayah about twisting about يلون ألسنتهم also somehow has to do with some of the things that Christians and Jews say. It's safe to assume that this distortion has also something to do with misinterpreting the Bible in order to establish the divinity of Jesus. Right? It would be the same thing. If you take, for example, the biblical word Father, like if Jesus talks about God as the Father, is that automatically an indication that he is his son for real? Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes even Muslims, when we say that, God is the Father of heavens and earth, we actually avoid using the word Father because it's very Christian, but it's not the wrong thing to say, about God, because being Lord, being Father, it's the same thing. The caregiver, the one that protects you, the one that takes care of you, and so forth. And so to take the word Father and to misinterpret and somehow establish that God himself begets a son, that becomes, disturbing. And so 79 basically says, it is not conceivable for a prophet that receives revelation from God to say to other human beings, worship me in his stead, or think of me myself as God. وَلَكِنْ كُونُوا رَبَّانِيِّينَ. It says, be godly. And this is really, really beautiful. It was actually the theme of the Tarbiyah Institute a few years ago. It was the theme of Rabbaniyya, godliness, right? Be godly, بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تُعَلِّمُونَ الْكِتَابَ وَبِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَدْرُسُونَ. Godliness godliness of character is achieved when we study the deen and when we teach the deen. Both are, flip sides of the same coin. It can't just be one or the other. We have to do both. And this is how you establish, Rabbaniyya. We're almost done here. Last one that I want to cover, inshallah ta'ala, today is 81. وإذ أخذ الله ميثاق النبيين لما آتيتكم من الكتاب من كتاب وحكمة ثم جاءكم رسول مصدق لما معكم لتؤمنن به ولتنصرنه قال أأقررتم وأخذتم على ذلكم إصري قالوا بلى قال فاشهدوا وأنا معكم من الشاهدين. Let me read the translation to you. God God accepted through the prophets the solemn pledge from every prophet. And He said, if after all the revelation and the wisdom which I have given to you, there comes a prophet confirming the truth that you already hold, will you follow him? Will you give him help and support? I just want you to imagine this scenario, that as part of divine mandate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to every prophet and told every prophet, if in the unlikely scenario that in your lifetime the next prophet already arrived, and the next prophet came and said, I accept and uphold the divine teachings in your hands, and I will give the glad tidings of the next chapter of those same teachings, will you then give up being a prophet and then become his follower? What's the point of this, by the way? Like, aside maybe from Sulaiman and Dawood, who were both prophets at the same time, or maybe Zakaria and Yahya, it's very, very rare. And it's usually father and son. It's very, very rare that two prophets were contemporaneous. Because, or at least not in the same locality. They could be like contemporaneous, but in different locations. They don't make contact. But what is the point of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling all of His prophets and messengers, if in the event that the new prophet came and you're still alive, you need to become his helper and supporter? What's the point of this? It's the point that I've been saying all along, and that is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all one. And all these prophets and messengers, they are preaching parts of it, chapters of it. And in the context of Isa alayhi salam, because that's what we're talking about here, if this message is for Isa alayhi salam, if the next prophet came and you are still alive and he upheld your book, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to follow him. قال أأقررتم وأخذتم على ذلكم إصري? Do you testify and do you become witnesses and I will be before you? قالوا شهدنا. They both قالوا أقررنا. They all said, yes, Lord, we testify. قال فاشهدوا وأنا معكم من الشاهدين. Let us all be witnesses to this. So, some of the scholars say that it is as a result of this that Isa alayhi salam made the proclamation, وَرَسُولٌ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ اسمه أحمد. There will be a prophet that will come after me. His name is the Praised One, which, like I told you before, is also in the Apocryphal Gospels. And so, had Isa alayhi salam had Isa alayhi salam been around when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was given his prophecy, Isa would have been his follower. Had Musa alayhi salam been around when Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam came, he would have been his follower as well. And so I will end it here, inshallah, and I will take some of your questions, and then we're going to stand up for Salatul Dhuhr.
I want to make a statement about
Mm.
and ask a question. In the Christian faith, when I speak to fellow Christians, I always say that you consider the Omega and the Alpha and the Omega as far as it being God. And I said, how is it conceivable for you that if something is infinite, it could reproduce? That in itself, the meaning of God is infinite, and God is infinite. How is it that something that's infinite, even if you don't put a religion behind it,
Right.
okay,
Right.
if you just put it in a very general sense, how can you accept the fact of something's infinity, but yet you're going to lower its status to reproduction? Because of something that's infinite and can't possibly reproduce.
Exactly.
It has no beginning and no end.
Right. How does the infinite, begets the finite? But I think more than that is the question, why? What value does begetting a son give God? A value that did not occur to him prior when he sent all the other prophets. Like, what is so special about the Hebrews, who, by the way, received all of his prophets before? What is so special about them compared to all the other people that needed prophets and messengers Why send them? So it's not just a question of why, it's not the question of how does the infinite begets a son, it's also what value does it bring?
Right. To add to what you're saying is that the other argument behind that, obviously Allah is all-knowing. Why would Allah need to come in and experience the worldly experience through a prophet or through a human species like us when He already knows what is the beginning and the end? There's no purpose in Him to go through that experience because His divinity already has foretold Him what's going on.
All right. And if you make that assumption about God, then you've attributed deficiency to God.
Correct.
Then He needed to do that in order to complete something
It's a contradiction.
that He doesn't already have.
Exactly.
Right,
It's a
right, right.
contradiction.
All right. I appreciate that. Yes, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum salam.
Two questions. One regarding Mary and Joseph. I think in Christian theology they believe that they were married, but is that true? That's obviously not true in Islam. Also, the second question is,
Mm-hmm.
how many disciples were there according to Islam? Were there just 12 like in Christianity, or was there
Right.
hundreds of thousands or hundreds?
Thank you. So the first question, we do not believe that Maryam ever married. This is a claim that is made obviously by certain detractors, and I think some Christians gullibly kind of tag along by assuming that she married Joseph. Obviously not Joseph the son of Jacob. This is another Joseph, right? We don't accept that notion whatsoever because it kind of casts a doubt that perhaps it wasn't a virgin death, a virgin birth after all. The other question about the disciples, the number of the disciples is not mentioned in the Quran. In the Bible, especially the disciples that were present during Jesus' Last Supper was 12, but such notion is not mentioned in the Quran. I want to believe that there were more supporters of Jesus than just 12, but no numbers are mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith. Brother, you had a question? Sure. Yeah, so that's a good question. Even though it's not in Surat Al-Imran, but this particular narrative is in Surat Maryam. When she came back to her village, having given birth to Jesus, and they questioned her, the Quran says, "Ya ukhta Harun, ma kana abuki imra'a saw'in wa ma kanat ummuki baghiya." O sister of Aaron, your father was not, a bad person. Your mom was not a lewd woman. How could you possibly do this? And so the reference here is that Ukht Harun, it's basically like, this is in the Arabic language, when you say you are the brother of something or someone, or you are the sister of someone, it means that you belong to that tradition. So they would say, وَإِلَىٰ عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا. To the people of Ad, God sent them their brother Hud. It doesn't mean that he is brother to every single person in the community. It means that there is that association. And so she is associated to the family of Harun. And if you remember, one of the things that I said last time is that Waqim or Imran in the Quran, in most narrations, is a descendant of Harun. And so she belongs to the house of Harun, so to speak, or Aaron. This is a noble house. How could you allow yourself to have a child out of wedlock? So it's not a reference to her being sister to Harun, which makes her sister to Musa, right? Like, that would not make any sense. Yes. Because it was a source of honor. when someone like her, she is the daughter of their leader, Imran, and they loved him and they respected him so much. He had a religious authority over them. When his daughter now needs help and support, it would have given honor to any family. Yeah, yeah, and so they were competing for that honor. Yeah.
So when Ibrahim alayhi salam was Hanifa, like his heart was always like drawn towards pure and everything, right? But then, as you mentioned as well, not every heart is like it just see the straight line and follow the straight line, right?
Hmm.
Heart, every human is created differently. Some people have struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And I know myself, so it's always like this is the line, focus here and go straight. But heart is always like, right?
Sure.
So it's not like dancing around the gossiping around, but then it's more like fighting your own nafs all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
you know what's right, what's wrong. You wanna please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always stick to the right path, but your heart and your brain is all
You desire something else.
you know what I'm saying?
Mm-mm-mm.
So it's always a struggle, and I'm not shy. I'm never shy. I don't shy away from accepting it that my heart always struggle, but I try to focus on the right path, right?
Mm.
But then sometimes it doesn't feel fair to me. Like why my heart is always have to struggle, you know? Like why do I always have to focus more than my twin because she's always subhanallah walking on the straight path,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah. Excuse me. I appreciate that actually. So I was not what I was saying. I wasn't saying that people whose natural inclination is the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they find pleasure in that are better than those who still do the right thing but struggle. I wasn't saying that one is better than the other. I was just saying, wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah,
It would be nice.
it's nice.
It would be nice not to struggle. And so, for those of us who struggle, which is probably the vast majority of us, me included, I think maybe part of your dua needs to be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the natural inclination of your heart is to serve Him and to do the right thing. That you don't even have to struggle. It's like, remember the story of Umar radiallahu anhu when he would see the Sahaba pray tahajjud and qiyam, and then they were emotional and they cry and so forth, and he's not reacting emotionally, and he's just very upset at himself, yet he continued to pray tahajjud for like 20 years, and he continued to pray on a regular basis, and he says, one day I started feeling it. And so maybe after years and years and years of struggle, maybe when you're in your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with some tranquility in the heart, and then the struggle is not there anymore.
Or even if I die, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give me benefit that, she struggled by stick to the right path,
Sure. No, all of this is valid. I'm just saying, like, the journey will be a lot more enjoyable if your hawa, if your passion is in line with God's desires. I think we can all agree that the journey will be a lot more enjoyable if I don't have to suffer or struggle. But it doesn't matter how I feel at the end of the day, I still have to do my duty and I still have to do the right thing. Easy, difficult, inshallah, I'll still do it no matter what. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely take that into consideration. Yes?
My question is pertaining to this ayah in Surat Al-Imran. It says, يُعَلِّمَكُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ, right? And then there is another ayah in the Quran, Surah Yunus, Alif Lam Ra, تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْحَكِيمِ.
Mm.
So my question is that, تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْحَكِيمِ, while Quran is still compiling, the ayahs are being revealed, and here Allah says, these are, like he was taught from Kitabul, Al-Kitab, Wal-Hikmah, Wal-Torah, Wal-Injil. Is Al-Kitab a higher entity from which all the scriptures originate? Can I think of Al-Kitab as something else other than the scriptures, and then the scriptures are extension of that book?
I mean, the scriptures, all the scriptures are an extension of divine wisdom, right? The word kitab in the Quran doesn't just mean the Quran or the Bible or the books. It means writ. You know, we use the word write all the time, but sometimes we don't use the noun of the word write. Maybe we'll use the word written, but that is also a verb. The noun is writ, W-R-I-T, writ, which is that which is written and dictated, you know, in this particular context by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the divine. And so if there is a way to reduce infinite divine wisdom into words that the human being can understand, then those words would be included in his divine books. At some point it was the Bible, at some point it was the Torah, now it's become the Quran. So you definitely want to think of that in a general sense. The ayah in Surat Al-Imran, though, it says Al-Kitaba wal-Hikmah, which also means, it could imply that there is potential or possible hikmah that is not in the kitab. Practical hikmah, you know, wisdom that is acquired by day-to-day interactions or whatever it is. But then the one in Surah Yunus that you mentioned says that the kitab is the hikmah, right? So those are, you know, slightly two different things. But, you know, like I said, ultimately, all forms of wisdom will come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they take the shape of divine scriptures, you know, that's for sure.
Because in the Quran there's also Kitab, the mention of Kitab,
Mm-hmm.
right? One are the ayat, the muhkamat, those are the foundation of the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, there is also a mention of Kitab that records everything, so on and so forth.
وعنده أم الكتاب. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, that Kitab, or the mother of all books, that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, you know, again, there is no way for us to know exactly what that means. And the scholars have had, you know, all kinds of theories about it. The simplest way, I think, to approach it is, like I said, there is aspects of divine wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala practices that go above and beyond the purposes of the universe. That I don't know anything about. And then there is aspects of divine wisdom that are relevant to the universe, because there is no way that the universe is the only thing that He created.
Correct.
And so God's wisdom manifests itself in all kinds of different things, but there is an aspect of that wisdom that has manifested in the universe, and it is included in His divine scriptures. So maybe Kitab is a reference to the bigger set of divine wisdom that we only have a small piece of, you know, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows.
I had one more. No, please finish. No, you go.
Yeah, well, you can ask and I'll go back to it.
Just a quick question. So, it was the Torah. So I guess the Torah, the Gospel, and then the Quran.
Hmm.
So, did the Torah originate from Abraham Islam?
The Torah was the book of Moses. Right.
And that
Mhm.
was Hebrew.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I guess I should study on my own, but just a short summary. It was the Book of Moses, the Torah in Hebrew, and then the Gospel. How long after the Torah was the Gospel of Isa Islam?
I don't know exactly, but it's probably a couple of thousand years. Yeah, it's quite a bit. And then, you know, the Prophet Muhammad is 600, the Quran is 600 years after the Gospel. Yeah, 650, something like that. Yep.
So ayah in Al-Imran, I believe, that he will speak in his cradle, and then he will speak when he's older. Speaking in cradle makes sense because of mentioning, because that is miraculous. No baby speaks in a cradle, right? But speaking in older age is no miracle in terms of, it's no miracle. But what's mentioning of speaking in older age if he wasn't going to return?
I'm just going to go back to the ayah here. Because I think The one that you mentioned is in Maryam. Is in,
Tafseerah?
it's in Maryam. ويعلم الناس في
No,
المهدي.
it's in Surat Al-Imran. Wait, let me
Mm,
It's in the. It's when Hazrat Maryam is being told about that she's gonna have a son, and he's gonna be the Masih ibn Maryam, and he's gonna speak in cradle and in old age. That's I think the 33, 34 along those lines.
I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah, if you look at if you look at 46, no, not 46, 49. This is the one that talks about all his miracles and what he is going to be doing. There isn't much mention.
See, 346, please.
46?
Yes.
46. ويكلم الناس في المهدي. Yes, okay, got it. You're right. ويكلم الناس في المهدي وكهلا ومن الصالحين. So, the first type is the miraculous type where a baby is not supposed to talk. The second type is the wisdom of a prophet. So, you're an adult, but it doesn't mean that you speak wisdom that will inspire generations, that will, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was an adult. Not every adult managed to, create a civilization of 2 billion people. And so it's the power of his words that will transform people when he becomes an adult. Whereas, speaking as a baby, it's just a miracle to show the miraculous nature of his virgin birth. That would be my interpretation of the two. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's the charisma of prophethood that will transform and change people. Yeah.
So Wakahalan is basically not older age.
No, kahl is like 40s. I think shaykh is when you're 50 plus. But kahl is like, upper 30s and 40s. So I'm about to become shaykh in like about a year. Yes.
I was just looking at I see Mahdi is translated as the cradle.
Al-Mahd, yes.
Is this why he got the name of Mahdi, or is it the Messiah is also Mahdi? Because Isa is Mahdi, or are we expecting Imam Mahdi,
No. Those are completely two separate words. They are related etymologically, but they are two separate words. So this is Mahd with a kasra under the dal. It's not a ya. Mahdi is the guided one. But Mahd means like a cradle. It's something that is paved or something that is made straight and doesn't have any irregularities, so that the baby is able to sleep comfortably in it. So they call it Mahd because it was made to be straight and level. And that is what Hidayah also is about, linguistically speaking. Hidayah is about the removal of the obstacle that makes it difficult for you to be guided. So while they are linguistically related, here they have nothing to do with each other. I think there was a question back there as well.
Maybe I'm just nitpicking here, but considering the timeline of when Isa alayhi salam was a prophet and then Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last ayat that we were discussing about how, if there's a prophet in your time, then you need to follow him. And then there was a comment made about how Isa alayhi salam essentially said, there's going to be a prophet after me and whatnot. So I'm just wondering, timeline-wise, if we're talking about the Quran, which is revealed later, how is it possible that Isa alayhi salam was saying something in response to something that was revealed later? Does that make sense?
It was revealed in our Quran later, but it was given to him at his time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only Isa alayhi salam, he gave this to every prophet in order to maintain the continuity of the deen and to help people understand that these are not separate faiths. They are phases of the same faith. So he establishes with every prophet, he says to every prophet, I want you to give me my word, your word, that if the next prophet came, that you will follow him. So the prophets would say, absolutely, even though it happened rarely, but it became like a statement. It's a statement that would establish the continuity of the flow, the river of Islam from the time of Adam until the time of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Isa alayhi salam was a prophet who was also asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to testify as well. And it's based on that testimony that he was given the prophecy that a prophet after him is going to come. And that's when he prophesied for the coming or the advent of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So yes, we are told about all of that in the Quran, but the Quran documents events that actually happened way before the Quran itself was revealed. Does that make sense? Say again? And also it was in the Bible as well. Mm-hmm.
To follow your analogy of how these are essentially different chapters being revealed of the same book, does it make sense to, after this response, say that the book was in fact revealed every single time? Like if there's so many similarities, or is it just that the entire book was revealed to every prophet and only chapters were revealed to that prophet's ummah? And then, do you get where I'm going with this?
So the divine essence, the divine wisdom is the same in every book. But the requirements and the practices and the boundaries changed from one locality to the other based on the condition of the people and their needs and so forth. Not every message was universal, remember that. All the messages before the Prophet ﷺ were local messages. They were addressing local villages, local people, local problems. The only universal message was that of Muhammad ﷺ, rahmatan lil alameen. You are a mercy to all the worlds and all the universes. So it came as the culmination of all the small pieces that were revealed in all the previous scriptures. The tapestry, the mural on the wall was completed by the Quran, basically. Now you have the full picture of divine wisdom. And the last piece of the puzzle was basically, but see, like the Quran is not just the last piece of the puzzle. The Quran was the last layer of paint. The Quran defined the character and the quality of everything that came before it. It filled in all the gaps. And it connected all the dots. It made it all like one organic piece. Can one of you guys say adhan? Inshallah, we should pray Salat al-Dhuhr. Jazakallah khair, subhanak Allahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala fi khusr alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.